Okay, let's move on to some of the other elements that we have in 3D Studio. I'm just going to hide this toolbar here. There we go. Right then, at the bottom of the screen you can see the timeline. You can see you've got the timeline scrubber here. You can move that up and down to actually move backwards and forwards in time. On there you can see it tells you what the current range is. You can see you've got 0 of 100, so showing that you've got 0 to 100 frames there. You can see this little blue bar here that indicates exactly what frame you're on currently in time. And here you've got a little button that opens up the mini curve editor. So this is another way of getting to the curve editor, for when you're using that for animation. And whatever object you've got selected, you can see it's opened up the transformation animation area for that particular object. So useful if you want to quickly tweak something, but generally it's a better idea to use the full animation curve editor. So we'll just close that down again. Over to the right, when you're working with animation, you have the various animation options. For instance, you have set keys here, alter key here, key filters, and you can work with various elements there. Then you have the time shuttling options, play. If we just click on that, you can see it's playing. If we open this menu up, you can see you've got different options here for working with different time systems, NTSC, which is a 30 frames a second time system, or you can work with PAL, which is the British TV system, which works at 25 frames a second, or you can work with film, 24 frames a second there, or custom. You can set up any frame rate that you want to there. You can set up the beginning frame of your range here, the end time, the length of the animation and so forth. So you can do lots of little time tweaks and setup options there. You've got the play button here. Move forward one frame, move backwards one frame, go to the end of the animation, go to the beginning of the animation. So all your different options there for moving backwards and forwards in time and work with animations. And here you can see it shows the current frame that you're on at the moment. So you've got various options there for working with animation. Let's have a quick look at the curve editor here. I'll just bring that up here. As you can see, it's a larger version of the mini curve editor, which is pretty obvious. I'll just move this down here. I'll create a quick animation here, so you can see briefly what it's used for. It's obviously used for editing animation, but let's just show how that works. I'll turn on auto key, and I'm just going to make this teapot move through time. So I'm going to go to the end of our range here, and I'm going to make it move over here. And you can see immediately you've got these curves which have appeared in the curve editor to show how that teapot is moving in the three different axes. I'm going to go to the middle of the animation range, and I'm just going to give it a movement here. And again, you can see the curves are updating in the curve editor, and you can see how that's working there. So we'll just drop that there. And now you can go into the curve editor. You can scrub time in here. Another way of working, with the time scrubbing feature, you can just grab that bar, move that back and forth, and you can see as I'm doing that, the teapot's animating along its animation. And you can see in different parts of the curve we have a key at the beginning on the y-axis here, we have a key in the middle, and we have a key at the end, and you can just grab that key and you can just move that around. You can actually just change the animation by doing that, and it's easy to see that if we move the time slider to that particular frame and we move that, there we go, move that there. You can see the teapot moves in the viewport to correspond with the position that we're actually setting here in the curve editor. So, you have a lot of options there in the curve editor for working with animation. All these tools, and that's obviously something which we'll be coming to in the specialist DVD for 3D Studio Max, so we'll just leave that for now. There are two modes to the curve editor. We have the curve editor and the dope sheet. And the dope sheet basically represents your animation with these little squares here. And it's a much more sort of symbolic way of looking at scenes, working with blocks of animation, moving them around in time, scaling them and so forth. So the dope editor is a different way of working with animation, but it's also very useful. You don't always want to have to work with curves, and curves can get very messy. So the dope sheet is very useful in its own respect. Okay, so there we go. There we have the curve editor and the dope sheet. Okay, next we have a look at the material editor. Let's just bring that up here. And the material editor is obviously used for editing and working with materials in Max. It's a multifunctional system, and it'll work with basically any rendering system that you have in Max, Mental Ray, Brazil, whatever. It has a total of 24 render balls that you can actually see here, and each of these gives you a little preview of the material in question. If you grab the little bars in between the render balls and just drag around, you can use, it's the leftmost button that actually does that rather than middle. You can see you can pan around the full 24 balls. And another thing you can do, you can actually customize the view so you have more balls visible at once. You can see here I've got 3x2, but I could do the full 6x4. And then you can see all your render balls at once. It just depends on how much detail you want to see on. Oops, just close that down there. On your textures at any one time. I personally nearly always use 2x3. That's my preferred method for working. As an example, we'll just bring up the material map browser here, and we'll just replace that blend material with a standard material. There we go. Just close that down again. And here you can change lots of different options with materials. We will just change the diffuse color of this here. We'll make it a little bit more shiny. There we go. We'll go to maps, go down to bump mapping. We'll create a new, let's create a new noise map there. You can see you've got bump mapping on here now. And we'll just change the parameters on this until it makes an interesting bump map. There we go, that's pretty cool. We'll make it self-luminous by using a marble map there. Okay, there we go, and we'll just use color on that. So now we've got a self-luminous effect on it. Maybe we don't really like that, so you can just turn that off here. So it's quite a dense little GUI in this element of Max, the material editor. There's a lot of functionality packed into it, and as I said, it's pretty much something that we'll go into detail in a specific DVD. But there you go, that's the material editor. Right, let's have a quick look at particle flow. To bring up the particle flow dialog, you can just press 6 on your keyboard, and there it comes. We'll just expand this out a little bit until it gives us a little bit more room. The dialog for particle flow up is made of 4 parts. We have the schematic view here. We have the operator menu here, description window here, and over here we have the control panel for any operators that you currently have selected. If you click on any of the operators, you can see it brings up a description over here, so you can see what each one of these is. And for a much more in-depth description of that, you should look in the user help file. Or for instance, you can have a look at our specialist DVD on particle flow, or rather I should say our particle specialist series on particle flow, and we'll go into all this sort of stuff in much more detail there. So let's just create a standard flow. Just drag this in here. You can see it's just a drag and drop system, and you can move the different events around a particle flow. It's a very nice interface to work with particles. It's a schematic system, so particles are this source element here just creates the particles. Then they're birthed here, and then various operators act upon the particles to give you whatever it is that you're looking for in that particular effect. Let's say we wanted to have some sort of age test on particles. If particles are older than 10 frames long, then we want them to do something. We'll just drag an age test operator here, and you can see it's producing this little line here, which means we can just drop it into this event. So I'm going to put it towards the end of the event here. There we go. And we went then, when the particles are older than 10, let's say we want them to move to another event, and we'll change their speed. So we just grab a speed operator here, and we'll just wire that up. There we go. So there you can see why particle flow gets its name. As you can see, particles flow from one event to another, and by doing so you can completely control exactly what those particles are doing. When they collide with a surface, you can have them pass to another event. When they get to a certain age, you can have them do something. If you're using scripting, for instance, you can do a scripted operator, and that could test for anything. Proximity to an object, anything you like, really. It's a very, very flexible system, so definitely something worth looking at there. Okay, let's have a quick look at the quad box, which is this menuing system that you bring up by using the right mouse button. You can see it's called the quad box because it generally has 4 windows. You know, it could just have 1 or just 2. It's really up to you. In this case, in this particular circumstance, it has 4 windows. The quad box is contextual. That means the options in it change depending on what you have selected. So if you have a spline selected and you right click, it'll bring up a quad box which is specific to splines. If you're working in sub-object mode and you're working with a bunch of vertices and you right click, it'll bring up commands which are specific to vertices and so forth. So it's a very powerful feature which allows you to work exactly with the functionality that you're dealing with at that particular time in Max. Another thing that makes it very powerful is it's also keyboard specific. So it can be toggled with the 3 main toggle keys, that is Control, Shift and Alt. So if I do a right click, you can see it's bringing up one type of quad box. If I do that again whilst pressing Alt, it'll bring up another type. Control, it brings up another one again, and Shift, there you are, another quad box. So again, in each circumstance, depending on what keyboard toggle you're using, you'll get a different quad box. So a very flexible menuing system there, and something which I use, a great deal. Having just used the quad box, let's use that now to have a look at object properties. So we'll just select an object here, right click on it, brings up a quad box, and you can see here it's got the option for properties. So we'll just click on that and it's brought up the object property window. The object property window is used to store various properties of objects, which is pretty obvious really. Now, what are those properties? Well, you can see over here you've got rendering control. Here you can see, is an object renderable? Is it, will it inherit the visibility of its parent? Is it visible to a camera? What does that mean? Well, an object, when it's rendered in a lot of ray tracing systems, it can actually not be visible to a camera, but it can be visible to reflections. And in other software, that's also called primary and secondary visibility, i.e. primary is can you see it with your eye, and secondary visibility is can you see it in a reflection. So as an example, something that you could do with a vampire, if you're doing a scene which uses ray tracing, is you could turn on visible to camera, i.e. you can see the vampire, but you would turn off visible to reflection and refraction, which would mean that the vampire would not reflect in any ray trace surfaces. Vampires don't appear in mirrors. Well, you can do the same thing in 3D. You can actually get objects to appear exactly where you want them to in a scene. Now, that may seem like a very tenuous thing to do, but it's actually used a great deal. Let's say when you're rendering, the setup and the detail in that vampire model is extremely detailed, and you really can't get it to render with everything else in the scene. Well, what you can do is you can set up everything else in the scene to not render, just render the vampire. And then when you're finished with the vampire, you could set it up so you just render everything else, and then you have well, actually vampire isn't such a good example because the vampire wouldn't appear any reflections. So let's say you have the vampire hunter, and you turn on he's not visible to camera, but he is visible to reflections. And then when you render the scene, neither the vampire or the vampire hunter is actually visible in the scene, but you can actually see them in reflections. And then you can actually composite those two elements together in whatever compositing package that it is. And you've got total control over each element as well. If the vampire is not green enough or whatever, you can just color correct him in isolation. So you've got these various options here for working with rendering. Over here you've got viewport display options. Is the object see-through in the viewport? Does it display as a box? Backface culling on, lots of different options there. You've got interactivity options here. Is it hidden? Is it frozen? Over here you've got the options for motion blur. What type of motion blur will the object use? Is it on or all? Is it enabled? If it is enabled, is it object motion blur or image motion blur? And this actually can change as well. Different renderers have different methods for doing motion blur. So for those renderers, probably the only real relevant option is enabled, unless of course they use these other two flags, but use them in its own particular way. Up here you have the name of the teapot. You can change that here, and it shows the dimensions of the teapot and how many vertices it has, how many faces it has. So that's quite useful there for checking out the size of the object and so forth. It tells you the parent of the object, what material it's using, how many children it has, is it in a group or an assembly, and what layer it's on. So, you can also change the wireframe color there. So lots of different properties there. In advanced lighting, if you're using, as an example, radiosity, you can set up various options here. So this is used with the radiosity system for Macs. Here you have a very similar thing for mental ray. You can set up whether an object will actually generate caustics, receive caustics, various things there, which are specific to mental ray. And then you have user-defined properties. This is actually quite a useful thing. What this allows you to do is to actually create, as an example, a little text label, which you can put into this area here. And then you could use a script to actually check for that script label and use that to do something to the object. So it's basically a storage area for any sort of properties that are custom to your particular setup. So there you go, that's object properties.